Welcome to Zero to Start, a podcast about immersive development that brings you inspiring conversations with XR creators, developers, and industry leaders. I'm your host, Ceciliana Trevino. Subscribe to Zero to Start on your favorite podcast platform and follow our podcast page on LinkedIn. Since 2018, Virtuleap has been at the cutting edge of combining neuroscience and virtual reality to help increase attention levels and address cognitive illnesses, disorders, and learning challenges. On this episode, friend of the podcast, Amir Bozorgzadeh, co-founder and CEO of Virtuleap, is back to tell us all about the release of Cogniclear VR, an immersive cognitive screening test that uses gamified scenarios to assess a wide range of crucial cognitive abilities and collect extensive cognitive and behavioral data to enable early intervention for better health outcomes. We dive into the ongoing challenges of leading a startup at the intersection of emerging tech and healthcare, and how Virtuleap has survived, like Amir says, a reed in the wind. Let's get started. Amir, welcome to Zero to Start. It's so great to have you on the podcast again.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be back.
I wanted to start just by sharing with our listeners what inspired you to start Virtuleap and how has your vision evolved since the company's inception?
Right. Well, right before I even thought about virtual reality, I was mobile games developer and publisher. And I remember I was at one event and there was a VR contraption by some Parisian company. I believe it was called Birdly. And you basically strap into a very customized kind of device that makes you feel like a bird. So you got your arms slip into the wings and then boom, you switch into the simulation and you're suddenly flying miles above a city like New York City. And I remember I almost lost consciousness because I didn't realize that it was going to trigger my phobia of heights so severely. I remember my wife came over and whispered in my ear, "Breathe." I was stunned, and actually, after 5 minutes of persisting in that experience, I found that I was able to actually desensitize my fear of heights. My vertigo was starting to abate even after just like minutes of an experience like that. It totally stunned me so much into the potential of this technology that I started writing for VentureBeat and TechCrunch about the applications of VR. And then about 4 years later, after writing enough, I figured out like the intersection of VR and serious use cases like exposure therapy, like healthcare in general, like education is where I wanted to be. And that was the essence of what got me to start Virtuleap. It took about a year of running the company through our first accelerator in San Mateo, Boost VC, that we pivoted into its current form. What Virtuleap is today is essentially right at the intersection of the neurosciences and virtual reality, and specifically for developing and making available the bleeding edge cognitive training, cognitive therapeutics, and cognitive diagnostic tools that are completely embodied thanks to VR. And so they're really able to engage the human system from head to toe in a way that no other device, like screen-based device solution, could ever match.
How was that intersecting with the rise of COVID? I'm curious about suddenly the emphasis on remote telehealth. How did that impact the way that you were using virtual reality?
It's such a crazy period to look back on because yes, it's like a double-edged sword. Or you get cut. You get cut even when there's a benefit too, that every once in a while. And you have to be a masochist, a real masochist, to be even in a company that's in emerging technology, as well as trying to apply that emerging technology, not a mainstream technology, on the most stubborn ecosystems, sectors like healthcare, right? It's been the most painful ride, even pre-COVID. And then during COVID, you could see the landscape starting to rejig itself in such a way that it was opening the doors for companies like ours. But that still required, between the news of it and the trend of it, and actually the economics and the VC capital and all the infrastructure, it really enabling companies like us to take advantage of that trend, there was a gap. It's like you could see it in the news, like, yes, there was more interest, we're getting more phone calls, but still running a company at this intersection was still very, very traumatic before COVID, during COVID. Then we finally raised some proper capital just about last quarter, really, the end of 2023. And then things have shaped up for us in a way where post-COVID, we can now take advantage of it. But it really is like, nothing's immediate. Everything takes time. And especially when you're a science-driven company, you never cut corners unless you want to screw up in the wrong way. You can never cut corners in design. You can never cut corners in testing and focus groups, and accessibility and maximum comfort as the like hallmarks of the way that your teams collaborate, the game designers and the neuroscientists collaborating together to make sure that this is technology that is, in a way, I wasn't going to say sacred, but that sounds religious. I wanted to say, like, it's so profound when you see the children with intellectual disability enlivening themselves through a medium like VR. There's a responsibility when you see the technology allowing the older adults in nursing homes to feel like they're escaping the prisons that they're in some shape and form, especially during COVID. So there's not sacred, but there's a deep sense of dignity in what we're doing with this technology. And so, yes, in a long-winded answer, things have really shaped up in a way that it's much more interesting what we can do.
So there's Virtuleap, the company, and then there's your diagnostic testing products. Can you walk us through how you get into the game?
Yeah, well, Enhanced VR is our flagship product, and it's the one that's out right now, and we're working on. In fact, there's been 4 studies we published so far, but in fact, like this year, we're going to have 4 more published studies just on Enhanced VR. That's the therapeutic tool. That's the next generation of brain training, which is again, double-edged sword in terms of reputation, because I think brain training as a sector has some negativity around it, because sometimes there's companies in the past who have said it can do things that even I think is on the edge of snake oil salesman. There's the idea that you can do these games that are testing and training all your cognitive functions, and perhaps you can start elevating your ability to remember things or process things and calculate huge numbers. It's like, a very naive sort of way of looking at it. And everyone's always looking for a panacea in terms of supplements, especially nowadays, or some key thing you can do in your life, which is a health hack.
Celery juice or something like that.
Right. We're like addicted to it. It's actually nauseating for me at this stage, because I just turned 40 not so long ago, and I think after a while you start seeing the same pattern of human self-deceit take them away from what they should be focusing on, which is just like accepting themselves and focusing on their learning challenges and trying to do things that are practical, and making them the best versions of themselves that they are, not trying to be a superhero or someone who can go beyond natural boundaries. Not to say that there are those natural boundaries, but that's my point of view. And brain training, I think, only has a therapeutic effect when you have a deficit due to, let's say, a concussion, a traumatic brain injury. You're doing chemotherapy. You're one of the 70% of people who have a deficit memory fog because of the chemotherapy effect of the toxicity of going through that. Or me, I had memory fog after COVID. Last time I got it last year. So when there's a deficit, I think these kind of technologies can have a therapeutic value. But when you don't have a deficit, then they serve as a deep dive knowledge tool for understanding your cognitive strengths and weaknesses, kind of like your cognitive fingerprint. So you can understand why you are the way you are in the world, why your strengths are your strengths, and how those translate into you doing really well in one profession, but perhaps not so good in another one. Like, understanding yourself is another aspect of what these brain training tools can do in terms of the knowledge that they collect about your cognitive landscape. And that's our first product, Enhanced VR. It's in the use case of, like, in the workplace or in schools, it can be deep knowledge understanding. But in the case of ADHD, or people who have a deficit due to whatever situation, maybe they have mild cognitive impairment in their late 50s and 60s, which is a precursor to Alzheimer's, and they want to start exercising their brains in novel ways, and it can serve as a therapeutic there. But it's a wide range area. It can be in the non-medical but still serious use case in the wellness side of things, and it can be very medical in the sense of being used for people who have certain injuries or ailments, and this can serve as something that's therapeutic. The second product is called Cogniclear VR, and it's extremely only oriented in the medical setting because it's a screening tool for mild cognitive impairment. It's supposed to be a 30-minute tool that can capture more data about the cognition of an individual so that we can perhaps predict and understand what's happening much, much faster and earlier than any other neuropsychological assessment tool in the market today. The current version of Cogniclear is really oriented to when a neurologist or a GP sees that something is not going right. They do a small basic test on an individual who's reporting subjective cognitive decline, like they're not remembering things repetitively in a way that's starting to concern them. So they conduct this like really small sort of preliminary test, and if they don't respond well to it, then they would prescribe a solution like Cogniclear to be done in order to really assess whether there's an actual cognitive deficit. It's a screening tool to see whether someone has a deficit. If you're in your optimum, more or less, you should score with flying colors. It should be actually a pretty boring test for anyone who's a-okay right now. But if anything is flagged in this test, then it might not be like dire news. It's actually kind of like, boom, we got to go proactively into informing the neurologist, who is the one who gets the report, not the individual in the sense of Cogniclear. Cogniclear, they don't get anything directly. It's only the doctor that receives it. And the doctor is informed on what to do next steps in terms of, let's say, pharmaceuticals or non-pharmaceutical treatments or lifestyle changes based on what all we know about veering off the track of cognitive deterioration and towards using the good stuff of neuroplasticity.
So that really gives the gift of time.
That's it.
You're able to accelerate the information because you also have this trove of data points that you can't get any other way with the biometric data.
There's a huge taboo, at least for me, and I'm pretty sure Bill Gates too, that you don't want to go into an MRI scan just for fun and see, no one wants to check up their brain for problems. Brain health going wrong is a stigma for a lot of people out there. And so what happens is we don't do cognitive testing as a societal kind of habit. We don't do it like annually like the Japanese do. The Japanese, 80% of their workforce, it's like part of the culture. Whereas we don't do cognitive checkups as part of our annual checkup. Cognitive checkups should be part of these things. We should be screening for them all throughout our lives. Surgeons should be doing a cognitive examination before they go into the operating room, as far as I'm concerned. That all sorts of things are going wrong right now. I think I'm a doom and gloom fan nowadays. Ever since TikTok really started busting its moves, It's the flipping of the thumbs to go from one short form video after another that are all designed to strike your dopamine levels in such a way that they start to rewire your brain. You start to lose your sustained attention strength. And when your sustained attention strength starts to, as a cognitive function, when it starts to deteriorate because it's like a drug, these short form videos. They're doing deep studies all across the world right now, and they call it TikTok brain. But of course, that medium has now expanded to YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, everything, because it's such a moneymaker. And there's all these influencers who are just trying to get your attention as fast as possible and make you have a dopamine high. But then now you have kids who can barely watch longer than the 3-minute video before they start getting a FOMO of checking out what other quick video can I see. Endless numbers of people are going to bed, and their routine before sleep is to look at some TikTok or Instagram videos, short clips. When you have sustained attention skills and that function in general deteriorating, it's known in the literature that depression and mental health problems rise in inverse proportion. And the reason for that is because when you start to tamper with our dopamine levels in such a way that our neuroplasticity is making us like FOMO creatures, like always wondering what else is happening, what else, we can't concentrate.
Well, the doom scrolling,
that plus video, we basically lose our ability, not lose, but our side by side, our emotional regulation ability starts to deteriorate as well. We just did a study, Ceciliana. The manuscript is it was just submitted to be published, but it's a study in Spain where we found that by training with enhanced VR, children between 10 to, I believe, 16 years of age on our brain training games, we found in the population, the sample of people, of the kids, that they were able to better regulate their emotions because we were training their executive function. And we found a direct relationship that when you strengthen your executive function, your ability to concentrate, your ability to pay attention and sustain that attention in a single moment that extends through time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That coincides with your ability to better regulate your emotions.
That seems like it's going to be much more critical in the next 5 to 10 years as the generation ages. And are you suggesting that there might be a big gap between the youth of today as they get older and being able to manage a basic
Huge.
tasks that require
Huge.
concentration?
This is cognition crisis, and I don't think anyone is paying attention sufficiently.
Mm-hmm.
We have the U.S. government threatening to ban TikTok because it's from China, but I think they should be banning it for the other reason. But it's too late. It's everywhere, and the VCs are funding it like crazy. Anything that can mess with you that way is attention. Our ability to concentrate is the most important. It's the most central thing to what makes us us. And we're going down a course where we're losing our appreciation for this energetic currency. I don't know even what to call it anymore. People don't understand what's happening, especially for their kids, because I have plenty of couples who are our friends and they have young kids and they just want some moments of peace, and so they throw a screen at their laps. And yes, so the answer is yes. I think there's a huge gap. I think we are about to go into that period because the research hasn't come out to say this is really negative,
Damaging.
and damaging, and people, and we're not controlling it at whatsoever. We're magnifying it and amplifying it before the research will come out.
Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of exercises that are in enhanced VR and maybe some differences of Cogniclear?
Yeah, so enhanced VR really is like short puzzle games. They're really supposed to be about 3 minutes long, and they're inspired by neuropsychological assessment tools that then they've gamified, use the principles and mechanisms of gamification to make them fun. But they're games that span across 24 different cognitive functions. And when I say 24 cognitive functions, everybody is strong in some areas, but weak in others. And so when you play our games, there's a tendency to dislike some games because they're touching on your weaknesses. And no one, I don't care what people say in the self-help new age world, no one wants to self-improve themselves. They just want to improve their strengths and tuck away their weaknesses, because developing on your weaknesses sucks. It's like going to the gym and someone telling you that you're just, working out your upper body, but you got chicken legs. I think it's still the scientific term. Chicken legs. And no one wants to see their cognitive chicken legs or be it pointed out to them. So we had to, for example, start limiting access to our games because people kept on selecting the ones they like and avoiding the ones that they dislike. So we had to eliminate access in the B2C app for just going to the library, and we have to force you to play 3 random games every time you come in, because that's the only way. Or there's no retention and they drop off because they really don't want to face that side of them. But that's the point. It's that some games are targeting your memory and different types of memory: long-term memory, short-term memory, episodic memory. And then some other ones are completely diametrically opposed to motor control skills, spatial orientation, which I am such a subpar performer in those dimensions. And then suddenly I can tell my wife, stop making fun of me. I'm not on purpose forgetting how to get home or how to navigate through this, hike. I really have like almost a near disability when it comes to spatial orientation, because no other version of our application outside of VR could be able to tell you that. And Cogniclear is not gamified in the same way. It's actually a 30-minute locked test that you go from 14 different exercises. And those 14 exercises are very much aligned to and mapped according to, in a way that compared to any standardized test that neurologists are familiar with and have been using it for decades, basically it hits all the same categories as those tests, and then ultimately generates a report at the end of it that matches up with the same kind of report that they would get from those other tests, except we add the additional dimension of spatialized categories, right? And physiological sensory data as well. So it's just, it's amplified in all those other dimensions.
It's interesting when I was playing them because I was like, yeah, I had this sense of like, oh my gosh, am I like,
I'm a superhero. I'm just gliding through all these tests, right?
the simplicity too, the guidance through the program, the tutorials and the onboarding, it's fairly seamless experience. And yet the games are very simple. They don't feel like it's something like you're getting quizzed on, these differential equations or something.
Right. And I think that the distinction is it's not an IQ test to or an SAT sort of experience. It's really designed for people who have been screened already, pre-screened by their GP or neurologist for having something going wrong. Something's not right with their cognitive performance in this simple test. They need to have a deep data collection tool, which is unbeknownst to the user of Cogniclear. There's a lot of other additional data happening in terms of tracking their body posture, movement, all these things that are sometimes separated as separate tests from the actual cognitive test. But it's really not designed for you, Ceciliana. That's the key point. How dare you have you even do this test? Because of course this is for someone who just came because they need to do this test because something's not right. And I think another version of this sort of category of tool that we would look into developing would be more into the area of, I suppose, cognitive acumen testing, right? It's seeing even like, in high performance athletes or these kind of things, now making a test that's more oriented for the general population and understanding their aptitude in different ways. Whereas this test is all about if you do anything in any of the 14 tests that doesn't clearly pass you, it's evidence for the doctor to inform them on next steps and how to, address what's happening in this particular individual. In the case of as an alternative to an MRI scan, which is quite intrusive and invasive and very expensive in markets like the US, I think up to $7,000 if you're not covered by insurance. Instead, you do a test like this, a couple $100, right? Potentially reimbursable through a CPT code, but even so, it's very accessible as a test to inform the doctor in a way that can precede making someone go into a coffin device that I have claustrophobia, so I can't even go into an MRI scan. You can see why the inspiration of this tool came from. Everything is manipulated by me.
Well, and how does this relate to someone experiencing long COVID? Were there some diagnostics that you're doing around long COVID as well, or?
It's the point where you say it's so simple and so kind of easy and seamless because we spent the first, I think, even up to like last quarter, so about 2.5 years, we did co-design with a hospital partner. So back and forth design to make sure that someone with epilepsy, someone with posture instability, all sorts of potential ways that someone might have a bad experience with this. We had to kept on going back and forth, redesign in order to make it a test that is going to have the least likelihood of having an accessibility issue. And so that was always our number one focus. And we haven't been focusing only now. We're going to be launching with some of our launch partners from the US and Europe, as well as in Asia. We're going to be gathering data according to use cases like assessing long COVID or chemo brain, a very high degree of ADHD that even touches on the boundaries of, let's say, autism. We start to collect data of how this tool assesses it in correlation to other tests that are standardly used by neurologists for these therapeutic areas. And then we're going to compare the data. That's the next step for Cogniclear.
Do you have any early success stories or notable outcomes that you can share or partnerships that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, I can't name some of them, but UCLA, for example, is one of them that we've been working closely with. Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford has been reviewing and giving us positive feedback. I think the positive feedback has been, again, with the hospital partner, Luciadas in Portugal, that we've been working with at least, I think, 25 back and forth iterations of redesign with them. And the last focus group we did, it was just, my team is full of clinical, PhDs who aren't, and they're not necessarily drinking the Kool-Aid like I am, right? They're much
Mm-hmm.
more feet on the ground, especially Bebiana, who leads our partnerships. She's like, if she has a positive feedback to tell me, like it's a big event. Like she told me in the last focus group, she was delighted. She doesn't use those words, usually. So that's the thing, is that the design, it's been back and forth in this usability, so that now we know that it's something that is welcomed by people who are in states of mind that deserve our most delicate approach. And this screening tool has all of that in mind: delicate, welcoming, and I think most importantly, it's independent of the examiner being in the room, which is a real problem at the moment with the current test out there. I went to one hospital partner in Badalona near Barcelona. The guy was telling me that they had done the same test on the same individual in the same day, but at different times, once in the morning, once in the evening. And the scores were significantly different. And the only thing that they could figure out, and they discovered to be the case of why they were different, is because there was a different examiner in the room
Oh.
that caused different tension. So if you're having someone in the room watching over you, it actually has an impact. It's almost like that physics thing we always love to talk about. It's where like the particle or the wave. Wait, if there's an observer, it's a particle. But if it's not no observer, it's a wave. It's some kind of weird phenomenon where you have the pressure, the psychological stress of having someone breathing behind your neck as you're doing something. Because again, it's not an aptitude test, even like the IQ test. It's someone
Mm-hmm.
who's not in a good frame of mind who's been called upon to do this test,
How can people access Cogniclear if they're a patient or someone who's concerned about their own brain health and wants to get some diagnostics, or is a practitioner and wants to bring Cogniclear and Virtuleap into their research program?
Well, basically, you can email cogniclear@virtuleap.com, and that will come to myself, Bebiana, and Hossein, my CTO. And then we'll receive that, and we'll engage with you and figure out how best we could work together. But we're so partner friendly that the only reason I still haven't lost faith in running a startup like this, because I don't really like the whole VC community or energy about that whole world of startup funding and startup cycles. I'm not a very big business guy as well, which really annoys my investors as well. What keeps me happy is working with researchers, with scientists, and seeing the studies happening on populations that like are at risk and are in need of these technologies. Again, like we got so teary eyed when we saw the video it's actually posted on our LinkedIn page, of these people ranging from having autism to Asperger's to a range of different cognitive illnesses, disorders, and they were able to use a medium like VR in ways that everyone would say no. This is not a technology that you should have on people who have certain disabilities. No, VR transcends all of that in such a interesting way when you're able to engage someone in a digital format that's fully embodied.
Mm-hmm.
People can adapt and use those formats. And so that's the reason I'm in this business for the long haul, is because I want to work with doctors on the ground. So if they email whoever's listening here and wants to email Cogniclear virtually, we bend like a reed in the wind to make it happen. As long as you're in it to really see what cool things can happen with this technology, then we're very supportive and creative in how to make it happen.
And you're working with hospitals around the world. Tell me a little bit more about some of the partnerships.
Yeah, like with enhanced VR has been really the majority of our work, right? Because that came out about 3 years ago, and it's in its beta. It went from I think about 7, 8 games now to 15, and now we've been focused so much on Cogniclear that we haven't been building up the games of enhanced VR. But now we're going to be adding to it more and more. And those research partners are the same ones that typically want to work with Cogniclear, right? Because once they work with us as a team, it's a really hard world, the VR sector, right? A lot of university teams and stuff will make their own little VR prototypes and then do a study with them. But they're really inferior because they're not spending the time a full-on startup studio would spend on a product, right? They kind of create like a prototype with a lot of cracks and hard edges.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like you play some of the games, you see a lot of that research come out, and they're good research studies, really good. But if you saw the experiences, you're at least my eyes would bleed. It's like wow, like VR deserves so much better than that. And the poor participants of the study were sometimes doing like, I don't know, an hour long in that horrible VR experience. So the graphics and so on. Of course, those research teams don't have the funds to have AAA studio kind of style quality, right? But we're able to do that. But there's not many startups as well who have survived through COVID, through all this time to work with these research partners. Because these research studies, sometimes you go for a grant together, that takes a year. Then the study itself takes a year. Then you have another 6 months to get published the results. That's not a startup mentality. Startup mentality is break things, say sorry later, don't ask for permission, double your revenues. That's not what a science-driven VR company can do. It's not in the cards unless you want to be a criminal. So I swear, things I've seen.
Well, that'll be for another show.
Another podcast.
Well, on that note, given the extensive behavioral data, biometric data that you're able to collect, how do you ensure user privacy, data security, and what are some of the ethical considerations that guide your approach in handling this sensitive information?
Yeah, so we don't collect any PII information ourselves. We
PII?
personal identifiable, like the patient sort of data. Sorry, I went hardcore there. One thing is we've designed our data infrastructure in such a way in partnership with AWS that if we had not done things correctly, we'd be like minimum fines of $250,000. Just to show you, even if someone is a not great person in this sector, they have a concern even with the money side of things and fines to do things correctly. Like people take this very seriously on the server side of Amazon or Google or Microsoft, and they're watching for it. The startups themselves have to, it's not the old days where people can do things incorrectly. That's just one thing for me to say. Thankfully, there's so many more watchdogs on it, and there's just so much more support and people watching, especially in accelerator programs, to help you know about these things beforehand so that you don't do the startup side of things, like breaking things, like not collecting data in a proper way just because you don't have the staff on board. It's a legitimate issue when you don't have any resources and you're just a 2-person startup. How can you create a very sophisticated data infrastructure that can really respect user privacy in the ways that you have to be forward thinking? Because it takes a lot of time. But we've been around for over 5 years now, and we've done things in a way that's HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant. But beyond that, we save user data encrypted across multiple different servers. And so what that means is that the data records of an individual that uses our tool, like Enhanced VR, their data on one side, like their demographics, will be saved on one server. Their user, like located ID, will be on another one. Their actual data performing in the games themselves on a third one. So they're all separated and encrypted in such a way that you can never be 100% in this world. But I think we're probably the leaders in how to do it right.
Sometimes it can be easy to forget that there are company protocols and requirements in place to ensure the safety of user data.
I mean, again, I'm really a negative person when it comes to venture capital and startups, but they create a culture in which it's almost tacitly encouraged to not do things correctly. And that's why a VC that is funding the new e-commerce company for selling hot dogs online should not be forcing companies that they're funding in the science side of things, the medical side of things, to have to follow the same rubric of performance. They have to allow much more time and patience to have companies that are dealing with people's health or even their education or wellness, they have to have much more respect for that. But the problem is the VC model, as far as I'm concerned, is broken in that sense. It really is only oriented for hyper growth oriented startups. And so a lot of the companies in Europe and Asia and the US who are in my field of medical, who are VC backed, sometimes they kind of die way too early because they're being pressured to do things and not do things correctly as well, that I've seen a lot. And I would not
that's a whole nother
share it on a
episode too.
podcast necessarily. I don't know.
It's for your memoirs.
It is, but it would only be published posthumously, you know?
That's the challenge then for startups in the health space, because they have that added responsibility to really produce results that were produced by ethical means so that the safety of the participants is protected. And that doesn't really coincide with the investment timeline horizons of the VCs, is what you're saying. It's just
Yeah, like Theranos is a perfect example, right?
okay.
Fake it till you make it. No, you can't do that in this sector. For the love of all that's good and holy. What the hell? How can fake it till you make it be applied to a startup ethos, applying their solution for kids, poor little kids with fucking, sorry, I'm going to swear, with ADHD, you know, or something like that? It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. And that's what the VC culture prompts, this instills in unfortunately in this whole generation, that also, like we just spoke about a little earlier, is also being mentally
Degraded
by these new mediums. So we're at an interesting period, and I can sound very negative, but I'm not.
You
I'm
just
not.
see things from a different point of view, and it gives you a certain sense of you're just in the mix. You see how the cake is made.
Yeah, it's such an honor to be making the content that we are, but it's also an honor because we shouldn't really be alive right now. Like as a startup, we died like 20 deaths. The only reason we didn't die, I don't know even. There were so many months we couldn't have. And so it's such an honor to even still exist and then have these products that are well designed and they didn't cut corners. But I know how hard it is. And I hope there's ways that the governments offer more and more accessible funding that can, you know, be an alternative to VC capital, or another generation of VC capitalists come in that are, you know, not selling their investors quick money, you know?
Well, they have to have a North Star that's probably their origin story is related to someone close to them that has had an experience where this has been a life-saving measure.
Yeah, in that case, hopefully there would be only one top big investor in there, like you know, Mark Zuckerberg fund or someone. Because when you have multiple investors, just like I think George Carlin said it, whenever humans congregate into groups, things go wrong. You know, when you have one individual, it's a smart, creative, beautiful, soulful individual. But once they start getting in groups of three, things go wrong.
Yes, that would strike a little close to home. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, I did want to touch briefly on artificial intelligence and how that is impacting your sector and your business.
Well, the thing about AI is that, and I'm a big fan of ChatGPT and so on, but I don't consider that AI. I think it's machine learning. I think the word AI is being used incorrectly at the moment because I don't really. There's a thing called the Turing test, right? And can you trick someone into believing the other person messaging you is a human? And ChatGPT and some of these technologies can do that. But when I think about AI, I think I won't use that word internally in my company. We'll talk about machine learning algorithms, and those machine learning algorithms. How do they take the data that we're collecting about the body? How, you know, the postures, the shaking of the hands that are so subtle that you even yourself wouldn't notice them, your balance and your gait, all those things, and then combining it frame by frame in a cognitive exercise or game such as we have created it, Side by side with that postural and gesticulation data, we're also collecting your heart rate variability and skin conductivity and pupil dilation tracking. And we're collecting all of this neuropsychological data, like 3 dimensions of data all together. The way that we are excited about machine learning algorithms, at least, is that what can we start to understand between those 3 dimensions? We call it predictive analytics. How can we start to serve as biomarkers that in that data, we can say that this person might in 20 years have an issue with mild cognitive impairment. And so even before we have to do a screening tool, years and years before, we can also already detect a pattern that we can address so early in the stages that it's not even an issue. It's that kind of North Star in terms of the machine learning potential on what can be done with the data, because we're collecting about 250,000 data points every 2 minutes. It's the next generation of data collection, but how do we make use of that without AI technologies?
Fascinating. There's so much potential, and you're really just scratching the surface. And so the testament to your longevity is important.
It feels really good when we're able to stop and think about it and all the stuff we're doing. But again, you're right. There's a lot of areas and we're just scratching on the surface, and we don't even have some of the key people to start digging in those areas. We only have one neuroscientist or one machine learning expert or one. So when you start having teams, the complications of running the company, of course, has lots of drawbacks, because right now we have a really good company culture. There's not one element right now, knock on wood, of toxicity in my workplace. Everybody is mission driven and likes being together. And you lose some of that stability when you grow and have to hire too fast. And then you bring people on board who are not mission driven. And so they start doing leadership decisions that are not for the best interest of the company and all these things, right? It's a very big thing. You can listen to what, people of the level of Elon Musk and all those people are doing with AI right now. They're all just in a frenzy, worried about every Terminator situation coming up ahead of us. And I like to live more simply as long as possible.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add about trends in the business or news that you're excited about?
I think the Apple launch has been very good for the industry. I think their performance is a little bit softer on the market than I expected, and a lot of people were kind of hoping for, but they're going to release something hopefully by next year that is much cheaper as well, more affordable as a next version of their device. It's ultimately a very positive event that happened with Apple releasing their device, and especially because now you have rumors of other big players in the space like Microsoft and Google and all sorts of different players preparing to create competitive devices. So that means a whole new, I don't want to say hype cycle, but it's another hype cycle. And that means, a lot more activity.
Resources and
resources. Yeah, goodness. And stuff that will be unfortunately not so good. But that's part of the darn journey of being in this kind of sector.
Well, thanks so much. The journey is definitely brighter with you here, leading the way in some of the most advanced cognitive health applications. And we'll be sure to leave links to the items that we discussed in the show notes, along with how to get in touch with you if there are some of our listeners who would like to find out more.
Thank you so much for having me on board, Ceciliana, and I look forward to our next episode in not too far off future.
Virtuleap continues to push the boundaries of what's possible in merging neuroscience with VR, helping shape a future where cognitive health can be assessed and improved in more dynamic and immersive ways. Amir's journey is another testament to the determination and adaptability required for sustaining your values and impact through the hype cycles of change and innovation. Thanks for listening. And on a side note, I just got the new Meta Quest 3S and downloaded the new Unity 6 to start tinkering with Meta Blocks. So stay tuned for more on that, hopefully just before Halloween. You can support Zero to Start by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, give us a rating, share this episode with your friends, and connect with us on our LinkedIn page. Until next time, happy installing.